The fields were barren, the skies were silent, the once fertile land, known for its bountiful harvests, now lay in desolation. The earth, cracked and dry, seemed to cry out for mercy. The vibrant greens had turned to shades of brown and grey, a stark reminder of the life that once thrived here. No rain fell in Israel. The heavens seemed to have closed their doors, withholding the life-giving water that the land so desperately needed. The clouds, once heavy with promise, had vanished, leaving behind an endless expanse of blue emptiness. For 3 long years, the land endured a relentless famine. People were hungry, children were weak. The granaries, once overflowing with grain, now stood empty and abandoned. The cries of the hungry echoed through the villages, a haunting reminder of the suffering that had befallen them. Desperation gripped the hearts of the Israelites. Families huddled together, their faces etched with worry and fear. Mothers clutched their children, trying to shield them from the harsh reality of their plight. Fathers, once providers, now felt helpless in the face of such overwhelming need. Their king, David, a man after God's own heart, was deeply troubled. He walked among his people, witnessing their suffering firsthand. The weight of their despair pressed heavily upon him, and he knew he had to seek divine intervention. He sought the face of God, desperate for answers. In the quiet of the night, he knelt in prayer, his heart heavy with the burden of his people's suffering. He pleaded for guidance, for a way to end the famine and bring relief to the land. "Why this suffering?" he cried out. What had they done to deserve such a harsh punishment? His voice, filled with anguish, echoed through the halls of his palace, a testament to his deep concern for his people. The Lord's answer echoed with the weight of a long-forgotten sin. The silence was broken by a voice, solemn and powerful, revealing the cause of their suffering. It was a sin that had been buried in the annals of history, now brought to light by their desperate pleas. "It is because of Saul and his blood-stained house." The voice spoke of the former king, Saul, and the atrocities he had committed. His actions had left a stain on the land, a curse that now manifested as the famine that plagued them. It is because he put the Gibeonites to death. The Gibeonites, a people who had been wronged, their blood crying out for justice. The famine was a consequence of this ancient injustice, a divine retribution for the sins of the past. Centuries earlier, Joshua, the successor to Moses, had made a covenant of peace with the Gibeonites. This agreement was forged in a time of great uncertainty and transition for the Israelites, as they sought to establish themselves in the Promised Land. Joshua, a wise and discerning leader, recognized the importance of alliances even with those who had deceived them. The Gibeonites, a cunning and resourceful people, had tricked Israel into the agreement by pretending to be from a distant land. They wore old clothes and carried moldy bread to give the impression of a long journey. Despite the deception, the treaty was honored because it was made in the name of God. An oath made in God's name was considered sacred and inviolable. It was a solemn promise that bound the Israelites to protect the Gibeonites, regardless of the circumstances under which it was made. This covenant was a testament to the Israelites' commitment to uphold their word and maintain their integrity. However, Saul, the first king of Israel, in his zeal for the nation, had disregarded this covenant. Saul's reign was marked by his fervent desire to unify and strengthen Israel, but his actions often led to unintended consequences. Driven by pride and a desire for conquest, Saul had mercilessly slaughtered the Gibeonites. His actions were fueled by a misguided sense of nationalism and a desire to assert dominance over all who lived in the land. This brutal act was a direct violation of the sacred oath made by Joshua. By violating the sacred oath, Saul brought a blood guilt upon Israel. This blood guilt was a serious offense in biblical times, as it represented a breach of trust and a failure to honor a commitment made before God. The consequences of such a sin were severe and far-reaching. Now, years later, the consequences of Saul's sin had returned to haunt the land. The once prosperous and fertile land of Israel was now plagued by famine. The people suffered, and the land lay barren, a stark reminder of the cost of breaking a sacred covenant. The famine was a stark reminder that God's justice, though sometimes delayed, is never denied. The land's suffering was a manifestation of divine retribution, a call for the people to remember their commitments and the sanctity of their oaths. It was a lesson that the actions of one leader could have lasting repercussions for an entire nation, and that the divine justice of God would ultimately prevail. The Gibeonites, though wronged, were not interested in revenge. They understood the principle of justice. They approached King David with a heavy heart. They weren't seeking riches or land. They wanted atonement. They wanted the guilt of Saul's sin to be cleansed. They asked for 7 of Saul's descendants to be handed over to them for justice to be served. David, bound by his respect for God's law and his desire to see the famine end, agreed to their request. He chose 7 of Saul's sons and grandsons. Among those chosen were 2 sons of Saul's concubine, Rizpah, a woman thrust into the background of a royal drama not of her making. Imagine her grief, a mother forced to witness the consequences of a sin she did not commit. Rizpah, a woman of strength and resilience, found herself in a situation where her voice was silenced, her pain overlooked. Her sons, innocent and unaware of the political machinations around them, were caught in a web of retribution and vengeance. Her sons, caught in the crossfire of a past they did not choose, were now pawns in a game of atonement. The weight of their fate bore heavily on Rizpah's heart, a heart already burdened by the loss of her status and security. They were given over to the Gibeonites, a people seeking justice for wrongs committed against them. The Gibeonites, wronged by Saul, demanded a price, and it was Rizpah's sons who were chosen to pay it. The decision was made, and there was no turning back. The 7 descendants of Saul were hanged on a hill before the Lord. This act, meant to appease the anger of the Gibeonites and bring an end to a famine, was a brutal reminder of the cost of sin and the lengths to which people would go to seek retribution. Their deaths, a tragic echo of Saul's own demise, reverberated through the land. The once mighty king who had fallen from grace now saw his lineage suffer the consequences of his actions. The echoes of his choices rippled through time, affecting even those who had no part in his sins. This served as a stark reminder of the enduring consequences of sin. The land, once vibrant and full of life, now seemed to hold its breath, waiting for a sign that the atonement had been accepted, that the suffering had not been in vain. The land watched, holding its breath, as if it too felt the weight of the tragedy that had unfolded. The hills and valleys, silent witnesses to the sorrow and pain, seemed to mourn with Rizpah, waiting for a sign from God. The sky, dramatic and foreboding, mirrored the turmoil in Rizpah's heart. She stood vigil over her sons, refusing to let their bodies be desecrated by animals or the elements, a testament to her enduring love and strength. Her actions, a silent plea for justice and mercy, resonated through the ages, a poignant reminder of the price of atonement. Rizpah, consumed by grief but not by despair, refused to let her sons be forgotten. She took upon herself a vigil of unimaginable sorrow. She sat on that desolate hill beneath the scorching sun and the chilling night, guarding the bodies of her sons from vultures and wild animals. Her love, fierce and unwavering, became a silent testament to a mother's unwavering devotion. For days she stayed, her mournful cries echoing across the desolate landscape. News of Rizpah's selfless act reached David. His heart, already heavy with the burden of leadership, was moved by her unwavering love. He saw in her a reflection of God's own heart, a heart that grieves over the brokenness of his children. David, a man who knew both victory and defeat, understood the depths of Rizpah's sorrow. He ordered that the bodies of the 7 men, along with the bones of Saul and his son Jonathan, be taken down and given a proper burial. In a moving display of respect and compassion, David ensured that the bones of Saul and Jonathan were laid to rest in the tomb of their father, Kish. The remains of the 7 who had paid the price for Saul's sin were buried with honor in the land of Benjamin. This act of burial, a sacred ritual in Israelite culture, signified not only the end of their physical journey, but also the hope of peace and rest in the presence of God. With the sins of the past acknowledged and atoned for, the heavens opened. The long-awaited rains finally returned to the parched land of Israel. The fields, once barren and lifeless, sprang back to life. Crops flourished, and the people rejoiced. The famine, a stark reminder of God's displeasure, had finally ended. It was a tangible sign that God had heard the cries of his people and had extended his mercy once more. The story of the Gibeonites, a tale woven through generations, serves as a powerful reminder of God's unwavering commitment to justice and mercy. Saul's actions, driven by pride and a disregard for God's covenant, had far-reaching consequences. Yet even in the midst of judgment, God's mercy shines through. Rizpah's unwavering devotion to her sons, David's compassion, and the ultimate resolution of the famine all point to a God who is both just and merciful. The story of the Gibeonites' vengeance is not just an ancient tale, it's a mirror reflecting timeless truths. We see echoes of our own lives in this story, the consequences of our choices, the pain of loss, the power of forgiveness, and the hope of redemption. It reminds us that God is a God who keeps his promises, who hears the cries of his people, and who offers forgiveness and restoration even in the face of tragedy.